What's up, Bhikkhus and Bhikkhunis? Welcome to this episode of the DJP. It's me, your old buddy Justin. And on this episode, I've got Toby Pasman. Toby is a neuroscience researcher and a fellow podcast host, actually. He hosts the podcast Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro, which is a rather strange name, which you'll hear the origins of in this episode. This is kind of a back to form for the Dharma Junkie podcast. We talk a lot about neuroplasticity, neurofeedback. We talk a lot about psychedelics and their efficacy in mental health applications. It's pretty much back to my roots, so to speak. I think you'll really enjoy this one. So what's up with me? I'm sure you're all wondering. Going through some weird times in my life. There's a lot of big changes going on right now. Some of them I should have seen coming, but didn't. And that's my fault for not being more mindful in those areas of my life. And that's karma. It's action and a direct result of that action. I mean, whether it was intentional or not, it's a direct result of my actions. So, I've made my bed. Now I have to lie in it. Hopefully it won't be too uncomfortable. But even if it is, you got to learn to be okay with not being okay. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Well, anyway, I'm going to quit rambling about that. Hopefully things work out. We'll see. I mean, they're going to work out. One way or the other, they're going to work out. But it's, whether they're going to work out to the way that I want them to or not. So, who knows? It doesn't matter. I'll be okay either way. Anyway, I've always had, inner critic problems. My inner critic is super harsh. I think I've talked about this a million times on this show already. But I've been reading this book by Tara Brach called Radical Compassion and really doing a lot of RAIN meditation, which is recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And just using that process to kind of work through some of that old bullshit that I told myself for so long that I started believing it. And, that's just my opinion, man. So, it's not true, any of it. All the shit you tell yourself is not true. So stop telling yourself negative shit, because it's probably not true. I'm just going to venture to guess you're probably not quite the piece of shit you think you are. Maybe you are, I don't know you. If you are, forgive yourself. It's just that simple. I mean, it's not a simple thing to do, but it's simple in theory. I don't know. But hey, do me a favor. If you do enjoy this show, please go on Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show and subscribe, because that affects the algorithm and puts it further to the top so more people will hear the show. And I'm really trying to get this thing out there. So it takes 2 seconds to do that. Well, probably more like a minute, but it's really simple. Just, look it up on Apple Podcasts. Please rate, review, and like the show. Share it with a friend. Share it with 2 and enjoy. So without further ado, Toby Pasman.
You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a hallucinatory state. Just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation. Information. Forming, controlling, operating your mind and your brain. Using digital techniques to overload, scramble, confuse, unfocus your mind. The natural state of the brain is chaos. Chaos is beautiful.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, no, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Good. It's just a nice, pleasant Sunday morning here, and I'm in Eugene, Oregon.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, whereabouts you based?
I am on the Gulf Coast of Florida. I'm in the Panhandle, right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm in LA.
Pensacola.
I am in Pensacola.
Oh, okay,
Nailed
right
it.
on.
Nailed it.
Okay. I was living on the other coast of Florida, on the east coast of Florida, a bit north of Fort Lauderdale and Deerfield Beach for a little while.
Okay. Yeah, I've got some friends in Deerfield Beach.
Yeah. I did my master's online with what is University of, is it West Florida? That's the one in Pensacola.
Yeah.
I was going to do it. I was going to do a master's. I started a master's of business administration with them, but that's why I'm remembering Pensacola.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, so which way did you end up going with the master's?
I ended up dropping the MBA. Honestly, I was just, I kind of made the decision I wanted to get my master's in psychology instead, even though I want to integrate the psychology in the business. It was just like,
right.
I don't know. There's too much, like, I felt like there was just non-relevant information in the MBA program. So I ended up dropping it. Yeah.
Did you finish your master's in psych?
I did. Awesome. I just finished that. Yeah. A few months ago.
That's actually exactly what I'm in school for right now. I'm not at the graduate school level yet. I'm still an undergrad, but
gotcha.
Steady trucking, man. 40 years old and I'm an undergrad.
Yeah. Hey, that's awesome. I mean, that was my undergraduate psychology classes were honestly my favorite. I think I got more out of undergrad than I did out of my grad program, to be honest. Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. I think that's where they really laid the groundwork, and then it's just kind of expanding upon that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what is your focus? Like, I mean, do you work in the mental health field or like, well, okay.
Yeah.
I know you deal with like neurofeedback and like neuroplasticity.
Right. Yeah. So my official title would be a neurophysiology researcher. Okay. So I've utilized these different neurotechnologies, such as you alluded to, neurofeedback, neurostimulation, then QEEG brain mapping. So looking at the electrical activity of the brain in these different settings. So I've employed these technologies at my college research lab. And then I went on to work at a peak performance facility, kind of training a lot of like business type, CEO type people. I saw some athletes, pro sports athletes and stuff, kind of peak performance training. Right. And then also used the technology in a completely different setting in South Florida. The job that I went down there for was at a substance abuse and mental health treatment facility. Right. Very cool. So I've seen this technology and worked with this technology, in anywhere from like kind of the wellness peak performance setting to treating, substance abuse and, mental health conditions. So, right.
Yeah, that's actually where my first encounter with neurofeedback was. I had no idea what it was. I had never even heard of it. And I'm a recovering addict. And I went to a rehab in 2018 locally that had a neurofeedback and did that, 2 or 3 times. Actually, I was doing it like every day. I was because they offered you had to do it at least twice a week. And I was like, no, I want to do it every day. Like I want to do it as much as possible. Like if it's going to be beneficial, like why wouldn't I want to do it as much as I can do it while I'm here, like give me all the neurofeedback. Yeah. So I've wondered because and when I started there and I started doing the neurofeedback, I mean, it's so strange. Just the whole procedure is very strange. How does that work? Like, how does neurofeedback work? Like what, because you it's basically the way it was done for me. And I'm assuming it's, neurofeedback is neurofeedback, but it's like, I don't know, it's like weird. It's almost like jazz type sound. Like I can't even explain what it is because it's the craziest shit one of the craziest things I've ever done as far as like this is going to help me. But it seemed like it did have a lasting beneficial effect. So how does that actually work?
Yeah. So, you have an EEG cap on you. Obviously, it's recording your real-time brain activity and, millisecond by millisecond basis. It's a very real-time recording of what your brain is doing electrically. And then the neurofeedback program or the specific protocol that you were on, I don't know, what it was designed to either, increase or decrease specific brain waves or maybe connectivity between regions. There's a lot of different things you can train with neurofeedback, but basically how it, is operating is whenever your brain is producing the desired electrical frequency that we're training it to produce, there's going to be the positive feedback, which might look like the screen getting bigger, might look like if it's audio feedback, the tones getting louder, kind of telling your brain, okay, good job, keep doing what you're doing. And then say, your brain starts deviating from that healthy activity as it fluctuates. Then, the screen might get smaller, the audio tones might get quieter, and kind of telling your brain, all right, nope, this isn't it.
Whatever you're doing is not the thing. Yeah.
Yep. Go back to what you were doing to get positive feedback.
Right on. Yeah. Cause it was super crazy, man. Like the protocol that they had me on, I remember that it measured alpha and theta brainwaves, and I can't remember the capacity to which it did so, but it was like this super psychedelic screen. Like, and I just remember like the more I would just like disassociate, like the crazier it got. And I remember like, I was like, all right, I'm going to do some free association. I remember trying to play with it and like do like free association in my brain, just like whatever would pop in, like not trying to control thought, just like letting the thought be the thought and just letting it come in and pass. It's basically what you do with like an insight meditation, like a Vipassana meditation. That's kind of the way I approached it. But yeah, it was super, super weird. Like I enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it though. And like I said, it did seem to have a beneficial, outcome to it.
Yeah. You can drop into some crazy states of consciousness, depending on what you're training. But yeah, that's very much reminiscent of, a deep meditative experience, or even like a psychedelic sort of experience where you're, normally most of us are producing a lot of beta brain waves just as our kind of waking state, thinking about things, going about our day, just kind of doing things in the external world. But, when you drop into that, alpha theta zone where it's like this sort of dreamy, mystical land, where it's like a lot of interesting stuff can happen there. And yeah, I mean, the alpha theta protocol I know is used a lot in treating, substance abuse, particularly. I know of like with alcohol, that's like oftentimes people are drinking, like when you look at what alcohol does on an electrical level, it kind of reduces those really fast, high amplitude beta brain waves and brings you down into a slower kind of alpha or theta state, kind of producing that sort of, euphoric kind of buzz or intoxication. Right. So, what that's often people who are like strongly driven to drink, it's because they have such a excess production of those fast beta waves that they're literally self-medicating,
right? Trying to slow that down.
Yeah. And why people get, addicted is because it works, right? Like in the short term, it really does get you into that nice, relaxed state. But it's like, if we can use a technology like neurofeedback to actually train your brain to be able to access that state whenever it needs to, without needing something externally, you can hopefully get all the same benefits of relaxation and stress relief without, the toxic effects of, a chemical like alcohol.
Right. Yeah. And that's a pretty toxic substance there. It's like one of the most toxic substances, I think.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked at the nut harm index? Like Professor David Nutt, I can't remember. It was out of the UK. I can't remember. I think it was Cambridge, maybe.
I have seen some of his research.
Yeah, it was like alcohol, like on the least harmful to the most harmful spectrum. Like alcohol is like the most harmful thing you can put in your body. Like heroin's not even as bad as alcohol.
Yeah,
and they're like alcohol is like the worst thing you can do for yourself and society, basically.
And that was echoed in the psychoactive drugs class that I took in undergrad, where the whole premise of the class kind of was like, alcohol, despite, obviously like
but despite
college students,
legality,
despite legality, it's like, I think a lot of it has to do with just like the method of administration. Like if we're able to put heroin into sugary drinks, and just because it's like, it's societally acceptable to be sipping something, whereas if you needed to shoot up alcohol into your arm, that doesn't look too sexy to do at parties. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a horrible drug. I think like I saw something about like, the alcohol and like it causes cancer basically to like every single organ it passes through, right? Like mouth cancer, throat cancer, esophageal cancer, like literally everything alcohol passes through, it destroys. So,
I mean, it's poison. I mean, that's what it does. That's why it has the effect that it has. You're poisoning yourself when you consume it. It's like, I'm just going to go get a big bottle of poison. Like, you put it that way, it sounds far less appealing.
Right.
Yeah.
Certainly so.
Interestingly enough, on the opposite end of the scale, the least harmful substance, as far as like, well, quote unquote recreational drugs. I don't like using that term because what defines a recreational drug? How do you use a drug recreation? You know what I'm saying? But psilocybin, least harmful, like less harmful than marijuana, like the least harmful thing you can do for yourself, and probably the most beneficial, in my opinion.
I'm a huge proponent of, I am so fascinated by psilocybin and the research. I talked to some a specific psychedelic researcher and psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins. So Johns Hopkins, I don't know if you've ever heard.
Very familiar with with everything Johns Hopkins is doing.
Yeah, so
I keep really up to date on any new advances in psychedelic research.
Yeah.
I don't really use psychedelics very much anymore because I'm kind of working in like a program, I'm in like a 12-step program, and they're like, oh, you can't do that. But that's not going to say that like I don't feel like it's still beneficial and can benefit some people. The only reason the only reason I'm not doing it is because my sponsor would bitch at me, and people I know would bitch at me. It seems like a silly reason to do it, especially for a book that was written in 1954. It's like the funny thing about that to me, and I've brought this up to a few of my guests recently, is like, the NA model is basically based off of the AA model, right? And AA was founded in, I believe, the 40s by Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson was a huge proponent of LSD because, like, in the steps, there's, we have come to a spiritual awakening, and he thought that you could expedite the steps and expedite that spiritual awakening with LSD, and he, took LSD numerous times. So the founder of the Alcoholics Anonymous program was a huge proponent of LSD, and the AA program gave birth to NA, and they're like, no, you can't do anything. The thing that bothers me about the NA program, and some people might take umbrage with this, but it's like, where do you draw the line? If you're going to say, well, this is a mind altering substance, well, it's like, okay, well, yeah, but so is caffeine, and so is nicotine, and so is sugar. All these things are technically mind altering substances, but it's okay to drink coffee at the meetings. It's okay to smoke cigarettes at the meetings. But you're going to say that psilocybin, which as far as the research is showing right now, is hugely beneficial for addiction issues. It's hugely beneficial for depression issues, post-traumatic stress, just a whole litany of afflictions could be solved with this substance, but you're just going to dismiss it because it's a mind-altering substance. And I just don't agree with that.
I don't either. I mean, you could, all of the technologies that I work with are mind-altering. Neurofeedback is mind-altering. I think there's a negative connotation that people have of whenever they think of a psychoactive drug or mind-altering, but it's like, well, your mind could be altered in negative ways if you, are going on benders and not sleeping enough and not exercising. Those are all ways to negatively impact your mind. Whereas, you take a substance like psilocybin that when you look at the objective data, like it literally, it increases neuroplasticity, increases neurogenesis.
Yeah, it creates new brain cells. Like it literally makes new brain cells.
whereas alcohol is literally killing those brain cells. So it's like, when you look at the drugs objectively without like any of the legal or political, whatever sort of agendas that I think people have that get in the way of how they perceive these substances, like, 100%. I think psilocybin, things like, LSD, MDMA is another one that I think, people have a negative connotation of, or at least previously, just because of, partying and, ecstasy, but now they're seeing so many benefits for treating like PTSD in veterans, social anxiety, and autistic adults, just to name a few of the couple of the studies that I've seen. But it's like all of these things, I think when they're used properly, like in the correct dosages, and you ensure purity, obviously, like, cause like, if you're taking something that you think is MDMA and it's really some
2CE
pill
or something,
that's different research chemicals, it's like, and then you have bad side effects or whatever, it's like, is it really fair to blame the MDMA, or is it like, well, it's caused by this concoction of weird, so I think that's why I'm such a proponent of like legalizing these things.
Absolutely. Legalizing and regulating and testing purity.
Yes,
exactly.
And then I think even the next step though, I think is like the psychedelic assisted therapy, where it's like you get these substances in the hands of trained mental health professionals,
right,
who also
setting.
Who also understand how these drugs affect the body and brain. And then, you sort of guide someone through an experience. I've heard some, therapists say that they've been able to accomplish, within one session of like MDMA assisted psychotherapy, what
like
what
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
Like I've heard numerous different therapists say the same thing. So it's like, if it's that powerful,
it seems
like
counterintuitive to not use this.
That's basically where I was just going. Yeah.
I mean, it's available. It's especially with psilocybin, because if you're working with an isolated strain, it's being grown in a laboratory setting. You're not just going and picking them out of a field where it could be this, it could be that. You better be good at identifying them. It's like, no, we know what we're growing. We know what's in this, and even synthetic psilocybin. But it just seems crazy to me for people to still view it in the light that they do. There's just so much stigma attached to it. There was so much propaganda behind, the making everything illegal. It's like, look, man, psilocybin has been used for eons, like literally like thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Cultures have used psilocybin for spiritual experiences, for healing purposes. It's like, yes, this is a beneficial thing. We should definitely be doing research on it. I don't see any issue with it. And to bring up the NA thing again, one of the things that bothers me about it, like I said, is, first of all, like, where do you draw the line? Like if you're gonna smoke, which has been proven to be fucking terrible for you, like I still vape, but I quit smoking. So we know that smoking causes cancer. We know that absolutely. We also know that psilocybin is hugely beneficial and grows new brain cells, creates neurogenesis, repairs neural pathways. So like, where do you draw the line? It's okay for you to take like antidepressants that were prescribed by your doctor, or take sleeping medication that was doctor prescribed. So it's okay. But marijuana can be doctor prescribed now, but that's still not okay. Like,
yep.
Would you rather take Prozac or smoke weed? If I did still smoke weed, I would still smoke weed. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I'm not going to I would rather do a natural substance that I know is beneficial, that has never caused me any problems like marijuana, than take any number of, Wellbutrin or Effexor or anything like that, which there's no side effect. It's like, well, you could take this where there's this long list of side effects and negative implications and outcomes in a lot of cases. You could take SSRIs, or you could take psilocybin. Like if you take SSRIs, the psilocybin isn't going to work because your serotonin levels are already so elevated. But like, which would you rather take? Would you rather take an SSRI every day, or would you rather take a therapeutic dose of psilocybin once every 6 months?
And that's what's so cool about it is, that the fact that you're able to see like, follow-up studies showing the same alleviation of a person's depression, like even like a year later after a large dose of psilocybin. It's been a whole year and you're still seeing the antidepressant effects. It's like, you can't name any antidepressant, any Prozac, Lexapro that you could take one pill, right? If you took one pill and then measured a year, it wouldn't do anything. You have to take that stuff for at least 6 weeks to even
build it up in your system. Yeah.
In your system. So it's like, and going back to what you're saying about smoking too, is like, I don't know if you've seen some of the research with like psilocybin
smoking
as
cessation.
A smoking cessation.
Yeah.
Like more so than some of the leading, I think they often give people like, they compared it to like Wellbutrin and found it more effective.
By about 10 times, 10 times more effective.
Yeah. And it's like, so it's like, even if you're not a fan of drugs, even if you dislike, substances or whatever.
Right, if you've got the idea that drugs are evil, and
but it's like, I think pretty much any smart, rational person can understand if you're able to use a small, like a bit of psilocybin to get off of smoking cigarettes, which we all know how terrible that is for your health.
Exactly.
Like it doesn't make I can't see any argument why not to do that. Like it's by far the lesser of two evils.
The efficacy is just so high for it. It is psilocybin and psychedelic. I feel like psychedelics in general just have such a utility in addiction therapy and mental health realm.
Yeah. I think like when you look at what they're doing, like with, in the brain, it's like they really, it's kind of like a pattern interrupt. It breaks all of, the mind's kind of, it can kind of dissolve the ego, help us see sort of the negative beliefs and ideas that have sort of, are generating our current reality. And it's like, if we're able to then unpack that. And I think oftentimes it's like, it's what maybe even more so than the experience people get from the drug. It's like, what are you taking away from that experience? Like I've talked to plenty of people who it's like, they started, taking something like psilocybin. It's like, then they started improving their diet, eating all organic foods, and became a lot more aware of how their diet impacted them. It's like, these things, not only can they just, improve brain function, on their own, but it's like they can, I think, really lead people to radically shift their lifestyles in healthy ways.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. 100% agree. I used to do psilocybin pretty frequently, like large dose, like macro dose, micro dose is the big rage nowadays. But, I feel like, have you seen some of the studies where they're trying to take the psychedelic effects out of psychedelics? They're like trying to make it's like, that's for me, I think that like completely takes away the point. I think that the psychedelic experience is paramount to the spiritual experience, which is paramount to that ultimate life shift. Yeah. That's what causes that life shift, is that mystical spiritual experience, that I talked to God, like for sure. I talked to God and he told me to stop doing my bullshit, basically.
Yeah, no, I was interviewing a guy on a doctor, an anesthesiologist on my podcast recently. And he's the founder of this LA ketamine clinic. So ketamine, being another sort of psychedelic like, substance that is radically showing, to have great antidepressant effects and a pretty good safety profile, and what he told me, and this is like a board certified, Western medicine doctor. He's like an anesthesiologist, right? Like, but he is saying like, he believes it's like 60-40 in the sense of like he thinks 60% of ketamine's beneficial effects are like, what it's doing as far as, creating new neurons in the brain, new connections, decreasing inflammation. Ketamine has a bunch of really cool properties that, to it, but he thinks, 40%, so almost half of the effects that are resulting in improvements in his patient's depression are coming from the actual experience that they're having.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you take away that whole experience, I think you could drastically decrease the efficacy of some of these things. And that's, something being echoed by not some, hippie in a van. This is like, an a board certified award-winning anesthesiologist, top of his class, right, magna cum laude or whatever, who's saying this. So it's like, I think, yeah, it doesn't make much sense to me. And it's like, it seems taken away.
Silly to just like balk in the face of the science. Mm-hmm. It just seems silly to me. It's like, look, exactly like you said, it's not some fucking crazy hippie in a van like, nah, man, you should eat mushrooms and take ketamine every day. He's like, no, this is a doctor. This is a probably written many peer-reviewed papers.
Yep.
Certified fucking scientist. And he's like, no, this works. This works, and it works for this reason.
Yep.
And to disagree with that, it's like I said, it's like balking and laughing in the face of science. It's like, it just blows my mind that, that people can't break that ideology that has been ingrained into their heads that, if you take LSD, your feet will fall off and you'll jump off a roof and you'll go crazy and you'll never come back. It's like, probably not. Like for sure, there's those assholes out there that have done that crazy shit and given it a bad name for people. But ultimately, psychedelics are one of the least harmful things and most beneficial things you can do for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they have a lot of synergy with like the work that I do in terms of neurofeedback, neurostimulation. These are things that are also, working in somewhat similar mechanisms a lot of times, as far as, we're altering the electrical activity of the brain as substance is going to do as well. We're increasing blood flow to the brain, increasing neuroplasticity. And I see, a lot of like great potential synergies for like being able to do, like, for instance, at the addiction center that I was working at in South Florida, we would actually do neurostimulation for the ketamine patients like a few hours prior to their ketamine experience, because, kind of building off the theory that, with neurostimulation, there's a few hour window after a session where you still have this increased neuroplasticity. Your brain is reorganizing itself, creating all these new connections. So if you sort of prime, it's sort of like priming the pump in a sense, where you do a neurostimulation session and then follow it up with something like ketamine. We're seeing great results doing that. I think, the more these things become legalized and the more like therapists and, people in my world of neuroscience, applied neuroscience, have access to these tools, and we can build them into different protocols. I think there's so much we could do, in terms of being able to impact, positively impact someone's brain.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that, man. 100, probably 150%, if we're being honest. Like, there's so much truth in that. And that's super interesting that you would use that as like a primer to the ketamine experience. I wonder, just hypothetically, what the outcome would be of studies that involved not necessarily ketamine, but possibly ketamine, just any psychedelic, any beneficial psychedelic, whether it be psilocybin, ketamine. Rick Strassman did a lot of interesting research with DMT, and not just using the neurofeedback or neuroplasticity as a primer, but using it in conjunction with the experience. I wonder what effect that would have, what efficacy that would have, how much utility would be present in that. Yeah.
And that's something like I'm so interested in terms of just like, studying, like there's not enough research, in terms of like showing what these different substances, like what's actually say going on in the brain on an electrical level, say like before and after a session, even during a session. Like that's something I hope to, I'm definitely going to be able to do is, once I have the equipment to record a QEEG, which is basically an electrical study of a person's brain activity, and be it like, I'm so curious to do, just sample experiments, on say a buddy who wants to, do, trip on shrooms. Like, all right, let's do a brain. Let's look at what that person's brain is doing, before they take it, while they're in the midst of the experience, after the experience, maybe a week later. Like there's so much cool stuff that we could research. And it's such a fascinating thing to me, like, how these different things impact the brain, and then how we can actually, use a tool like an EEG to measure the real-time changes that are going on.
Right. Yeah. I have so much faith in psychedelics and the mental health and, like mental health applications and that field, that like, I just basically just starting a small investing in a few stocks. And the only stocks I've invested in are like psychedelic companies that are, developing, like, how can I put this? A pharmaceutical grade psychedelic for that purpose, for mental health purposes. Like I feel that there's so much future in that. That's like, that's where my money's going. I don't know, man. I have a feeling. That's the way things are going to go. What we've been doing, the stuff we've been giving people for as many years as we have, just apparently, not that it doesn't have some, not that it doesn't work to some extent and have some utility, but I think that ultimately psychedelics are going to be have more efficacy. I think they're just going to be across the board. It's going to be world changing.
Yeah.
I think that breaking down the stigma of psychedelics is going to be one of the biggest hurdles that we have is convincing people, like, despite what you've heard for 50 years now, this works.
Right. But it's like, yeah, when you look at just psychiatry and psychology just as fields, it's like the medications that are given and what's being done is it hasn't changed a lot in several decades. It's like, all these other fields of medicine, they're advancing, there's new therapies. It's like, I really think things like, the neurotechnology I work with, along with psychedelics, are these new kind of power tools that are going to like really revolutionize psychiatry, neurology, and just like peak performance and wellness too. Cause it's like, people like, I don't know, even if someone doesn't necessarily say struggle with, a specific mental or neurological disorder, we're all interested in feeling happier, more at peace, having better relationships. It's like, if we can achieve that through, using neurotechnology or through using psychedelics, I think it's going to change people on a fundamental level. And if it gets to enough people, it's going to change, all of society on a fundamental level.
I think that's probably why they were made illegal in the first place.
Absolutely. To control, like, you can't control people who think freely.
Yeah,
who think for themselves.
Exactly that. You can't control people who think for themselves.
Yep. People but if you create a bunch of sheep, then
I hate the term outside the box, but like that's literally what it does. It's like, okay, this is how society is laid out for you. And it's like, nah, but we don't have to do it that way. Like, and I think psychedelics kind of wake that up in people. They're like, yeah, I can do this in a completely different manner. It doesn't have to be the quote unquote American dream. I don't have to go get the 9 to 5 and have, 2.3 kids and the spouse and the white picket fence. Like it's a good model for people who don't have a vision of their own. And I think psychedelics give people their own vision,
Yeah. Which I think is like so important that it's like, I don't care what you're doing, even if I don't believe in what it is you believe in or whatever. It's like, I think it's awesome when people are like carving their own paths and following what they're passionate about. And it's like, if we could get more people who, I don't know. I mean, I think psychedelics can really kind of show you in a way how your mind works, how your mind is generating your reality, and realizing, how a lot of, your beliefs have been instilled by, society or parents, from like, as we're going through childhood. It's like, as a young child, you don't question, is what my mom is saying, is this completely factual? Yeah. No, we're sponges of just like, whatever is being told to us, that creates our kind of programming, as we go and, as we develop. So it's like, I think psychedelics can really, first off, show us what that programming is, and then also help us change that if that programming isn't working, and help people see, maybe I got into the profession that I'm working in because, I was encouraged, my parents always encouraged me to be a doctor, and, maybe I'm really actually super passionate about, building whatever it is, building decks or whatever. I don't care whatever that person's like passionate about. But it's like, I feel like if people follow, what other people want for them, for their lives, it's like, I think it's always going to lead to like unhappiness in the end.
Discontentment.
Discontent. Yeah.
Yeah. That's talking about like questioning, basically questioning authority figures. Because you're told all these things from, the time you're born, and you take them as truths, you take them as a relation of ideas rather than a matter of fact, It's like, and, even, that's an interesting conversation too. It's just the difference between relation of ideas and matters of fact. It's when you can get into that whole inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning area, and it's like, well, just because it has been this way and it's things have happened the same way for X amount of time does not necessarily dictate that things are always going to happen that way. And I think we get wrapped up in that a lot.
And it's like, a good therapist is going to be able to help people reach those same conclusions, right? Where it's like, if you've always done things a certain way, or if you've been depressed for this long period of time or whatever, it's like, that doesn't have to dictate your future. You can change all of these things. So it's like, yeah, I think a good therapist can lead someone there. Psychedelics could lead someone there, maybe a trauma or big, death in the family or something like, but I think it often takes, some event, to really cause people to be like, really examine their beliefs and their reality.
Right.
I mean, I feel like I was like growing up, I was always just a very like curious kid. And I was always like thinking about my own thinking and why I am the way that I am and why other people are the way they are. Obviously that led into my, studying, psychology and neuroscience. But, for people who aren't in those fields, who don't, I'm aware that I'm a bit of an anomaly in the sense that a lot of people aren't thinking about how their brains or your minds are generating their reality. So it's like, I think
those thoughts plague my mind constantly.
Yeah. But it's like, think about just like all the people, I mean, who are living lives that, they don't like that, it's like all of those people, it's like they're going to need something to wake them up. And I think a psychedelic can for sure do that, along with therapy or, other things. But
I think there's a number of modalities that can be reached by. I think that definitely therapy is one of them. I think that psychedelics are one of them. I think, if, a life-changing event can be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of my girlfriend, actually, she smoked DMT. She did it one time, and then she was like, I'm never doing drugs again. It was like the most overwhelmingly terrifying experience for her. She was like, I'm never doing drugs again. She quit smoking cigarettes. She quit doing everything. And so did it have a beneficial effect for her? I would say yes. For sure, it was probably not the most enjoyable experience for her at the time. But, when you look at, it's been quite a while since that happened. I think it was almost a year ago, maybe more. But since that happened, she's, like I said, has stopped doing all other substances, any substance really. She doesn't do any drugs anymore. She doesn't drink. She doesn't smoke cigarettes. And she's like completely turned her life around off of one DMT experience.
Yeah. I've heard similar things from a buddy who changed career paths, completely changed career paths, from smoking DMT once, that led, him to question all of this stuff. And yeah, I mean, I think, it's just like, it could just be one experience and it's enough for someone to be able to like realize the changes that they need to make in their lives to get them to where they want to, really be. So
maybe not even get them to where they want to be, but steer them away from where they don't want to be. I
think also like, you mentioned about like, sort of like, maybe it wasn't the most like comfortable experience. I think that's oftentimes like sort of an obstacle, almost like, or a roadblock or a trap that like people, like we all are like, we look for comfort and safety, right? And
that's like the biggest
comfort.
Roadblock,
think about like comfort food is often really bad for you. Think like, watching the same like TV shows and movie, like stuff that's like comfortable, but you're not pushing your boundaries. You're not, I feel like those are just like too many people are willing to settle for comfort and safety, whereas like, obviously like take something like working out. It's like, if you're comfortable the whole time that you're in the gym, like, I don't know if you're really doing anything, right? You got to feel like if you
no
get
pain, no gain, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that can be across the board with anything. And that's what I tell people all the time. I was like, they're like, I really don't want to do that. And I'm like, well, that sounds like exactly the thing you should be doing then. Like, if you don't want to do it, like, that's probably the thing you need to do. If it's uncomfortable, like lean into that uncomfortable. I'm a pretty heavy Dharma practitioner. I don't like to really call myself a Buddhist because then it opens up a whole litany of questions, but I'm essentially a Buddhist. So I am very big on just that, like being uncomfortable and like being comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's like being okay with not being okay and leaning into those really difficult experiences, because there is, so like I said, there's so much utility to be gained from them. Like you're not going to work through that experience without participating in that experience. And I think a lot of time, like you said, people get comfortable and then they're so addicted to comfort. But it's like, anything, the way it's been put to me by one of my teachers is like, there's no happiness to be derived from worldly things, because everything that is worldly is impermanent. So you have to derive happiness and joy from otherworldly things. And that's where, I get into the whole meditation aspect and the spiritual aspect. And it's like, if you have that base spirituality, I think you're ultimately going to have a happier existence than if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, I mean, I think like oftentimes like these neurotechnologies also are kind of referred to sometimes like as spiritual technologies, which I think is like something really interesting, that it's like, people don't usually associate like, like kind of like hardcore, like science and neurostimulation, with like spirituality. But, when we look at like spiritual experiences, we can examine what's going on in the brain. I mean, it's like psychedelics, their ability to produce mystical or spiritual experiences. It's like, it's not magic, there's certain brain areas that are becoming deactivated activated. Yeah. And it's like, if
the same, it's funny that you mentioned that, because of the same, I read a study one time, there was they basically did the same thing, like an EEG on a Buddhist monk while he was meditating, and just noticed, what was occurring in the brain at the time. And I can't, I can't remember all the results right off the top of my head, but it was astounding, the difference in his brain waves comparatively, and, and like you were talking about, the brain has this tendency to incline itself to what you surround it with. So, if you're surrounding it with positive intentions and positive thoughts and, like loving kindness, then you're going to start to reflect those things more in the world. Whereas if if you're inundating yourself with negative things, if you're watching the news all the time and there's constantly bad news, and you're working at a job that you hate, and you're doing all these things that people do repetitively, and then they're like, I'm not happy. Like, well, no shit, you're not happy. Like, you're surrounding yourself with negative influence. Like, if the more negative influence you surround yourself with, the more negative your life experience is going to be. And that's so interesting to me, because we're talking about neuroplasticity, and that is possible, that you can tell yourself these mantras, or just loving kindness phrases, or may I be at peace, may I be at ease. It's one of the, like, a meditation that I do is, may I be at ease, may I be at peace, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be filled with loving kindness, may I be at peace, may I be, and just repeating this, and I'll do it all day. Like, my meditation doesn't stop when I get off the cushion. You know what I'm saying? Like, meditation is in every aspect of my life. I meditate while I'm doing the dishes. I meditate while I'm driving, like, everything can be a meditative experience if you view it that way. And I repeat these phrases, these loving kindness phrases and compassion phrases and things like that to myself constantly, in the hopes that, because of neuroplasticity, eventually, it will kind of push out the bad and just leave the good.
Yeah. And I mean, I think everything that we generate in our lives, I mean, it all starts with a thought. I mean, anything created in this world starts with, the thinking, before that becomes at all, a tangible, like, reality in this world. Like, right. Someone for everything that's, someone had an idea for a microphone, and, that was something that was in their head, and they probably, started over and maybe started creating different prototypes and trying it out, right. And different people started adjusting it and building off of that technology. And then, we have in front of us, what we have, is these real quality microphones, but it's right. Like that wasn't just there.
Yeah. They didn't just fall out of the sky.
Right. And
the idea did. The idea did. Yeah, like, where did the ideas?
Exactly.
And that's weird. That's an interesting conversation to have, is like, where are thoughts generated from? Because in my experience, like, anything that is observable is not self. So the body is not self, because I can observe it. I can also observe my thoughts and my emotions. So that's not self either. So the thoughts are coming in from somewhere else. And it's interesting, if you, like I said, I'm a pretty heavy practicing Buddhist. I have a really dedicated meditation practice that I do daily. And it's interesting to observe the thoughts and, like, just recognize them as thoughts, because thoughts are just thoughts. They are just thoughts. They're not reality, and so it's like, where do the thoughts come from? Because I can observe myself thinking these sometimes crazy fucking ideas or crazy thoughts about like, self-worth or anything of that nature, and it's like to observe myself doing that, like, oh, that's a weird thought. Like, it's so strange to me that the brain can create these thoughts and I can observe them and be like, that's a weird thing. And they're two different things. Like, I am just the observer of the mind. Like, I'm not the mind. And that's just fascinating to me. It would be amazing if they could do some research on that. And I know they've been struggling with that. Like, where does consciousness come from for fucking ever? Like, that's one of the things that's like one of the biggest questions of science is like, where is consciousness derived from? I don't know. It's just a fascinating thought.
Yeah. And it's like that it's such an interesting thing, like to think about, where do those thoughts come from? Like someone who's super creative, it's like, I feel like it's like, the brain is a pattern recognition system in a lot of ways where it's like, being able, like intelligence, I feel like is oftentimes being able to like put together, different ideas and connections that other people might not be able to do. But also, I mean, just like viewing it more maybe from a spiritual perspective or whatever, you think about like, people like, prayer or, people describe as sort of like communicating with God or, whatever, or a higher power. Right. And meditation, I've heard it described as like listening to that higher power, listening to the universe or whatever it is, so it's like, how much is, how like where all of the things that I'm thinking that I feel like I came up with the idea, but did I really? Or is it like, is it being somehow streamed to me, transmitted?
Yeah. It's like, like Tesla, Tesla was like, no, he's like, these ideas aren't my own. They came to me in a dream. And it's like, I pulled them from the ether. It's like, that's so,
And I think something that might lend credence to that sort of, to that occurrence is like, who is it? The psychologist that talked about, Carl Jung, right? Like the collective unconscious. And it's like, like psychedelic experiences where people are like, reporting like similar types of like figures or archetypal figures or whatever. It's like, I feel like that just speaks to like, if people are experiencing the same visions or whatever experiences,
right? There has to be more to it than just a random anomaly. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, especially with the DMT experience. I don't know if you've read any like DMT trip reports, but like they're so similar, like across the board, like entities. And there's always like, there's one classic figure that's always seems to pop up, and it's like a woman, like almost like a gypsy kind of woman. Like, and I've heard about that from like 20 different people. And that's just fucking bizarre. It's like, well, you're all seeing the same thing. Now, is that some sort of collective unconscious, like archetypal figure that has been installed into us through a random series of events? Or is there something more to that? Is there, like people theorize that, there's this alternate DMT dimension, and like you break down the walls to that dimension by, ingesting DMT in whatever capacity you ingest it in, whether you do ayahuasca and drink it orally or you smoke it, or, I think when Rick Strassman was doing his studies, he was doing injections of DMT, but the experiences are all so similar. It's like, there's gotta be something more to it, let's investigate that. Like, let's look into that. But it's like, oh, what's illegal, so we can't. It's like, what the fuck, man? Like we're really tapping into like the realest of the real to me, like when we get to that, when we're talking about archetypes or whatever they are that exist synonymously among everybody, everybody who has these experiences, there's some similarity. And what the fuck is that? What is that? Like that's so mind blowing.
Oh yeah.
It's super crazy, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's bizarre. Just bizarre. I know when I've done DMT, like I did it for a little while, and I don't know, man, it definitely makes you question reality. Like, you go back to, the allegory of the cave, and it's like, well, is what we're looking at really real? And it's like, well, then you get to that whole simulation theory concept. And it's like, well, I don't know, man, there could be something to that. Like, as crazy as it sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Question. I think like all like different psychedelics and different experiences, like they cause you to question different things, in terms of like, maybe sometimes you're questioning, the nature of reality. Maybe sometimes you're questioning your belief system. And I don't know. It's like, I think like, they talk about just like, these mind expanding, things where it's just like, you look at like what, the sort of substances that people usually abuse, like downers, opioids, alcohol,
Right.
like these are constricting. Like no one pops a painkiller and says
their
like
consciousness constricting rather than consciousness expanding.
Expand. Right. And I think it's like people are more comfortable with, I think it oftentimes is a more comfortable experience to have your consciousness constricted.
Oh, for sure.
It's like
absolutely.
you're comfortable with it.
Absolutely.
So it's like, maybe that, is part of what, the whole legality thing or society accepting those certain drugs, because it can be scary as hell when you like start realizing.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah,
like,
for sure. Yeah. It's much easier to be sedated than woken up.
That well said. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%, man. 100%. I think that it can be a terrifying experience, but and outside of even any kind of like mystical experience or anything, but it just makes you, psychedelics, in my opinion, just make you question things. They make you think more critically.
Mm-hmm.
They really make you like, it almost opens up the philosophical side to the individual that never had a philosophical side. Like I've seen a lot of cases where people have, never done a psychedelic, and then they do it, and then they're like, start branching out in all these different areas that you would never expect that particular individual to branch out into. But it's because that consciousness has been expanded rather than constricted and dulled down. In a sense, it's like opioids and alcohol and things of that nature, even cocaine to an extent, because of the reward, the reward system that it's based off of, the dopamine dump drugs. And I think that's interesting too, is that all of the drugs that essentially have that sedative or like dulling down effect are dopamine functioning drugs, whereas all of the synergistic consciousness expanding drugs are serotonin functioning. So, that's just always been fascinating to me. It's like, yeah, stay away from the ones that fuck with your dopamine system. Just go to the ones that do the serotonin. I
think in general, like it's a pretty good philosophy when it comes to drugs. I mean, I think it's like dopamine being so involved with like, like compulsion and like we want to continue doing whatever it is that is eliciting that dopamine release.
Right. You want to feel good.
So it's like, you want to feel good. So it's like, that's not, necessarily going to be like productive if whatever you're taking, you just want more of, you want to continue,
right,
using, and then you need more. And then, all the other problems that result. Mm-hmm. But it's like, yeah, when you work on the serotonin system, completely different things happen. And yeah, I think, obviously like these psychedelics, it's like, some people, you could argue, get addicted to like the psychological effects of some of these drugs. I mean, in rare cases, there could be some mild addictive qualities psychologically, but like biologically, no one's getting hooked on acid. Yeah. No one's
physical.
Getting
there's no physical dependence at all. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which I think is like such a good like safeguard, mechanism that's like built into these substances.
Absolutely. I think, there's no, I've never, maybe once or twice, but pretty much across the board, like how many people have you met that are like, that took like a macro, like 5 gram silent darkness dose of mushrooms. And they're like, I can't wait to do that again tomorrow. Like, I don't think so. Like, that's a pretty jarring experience. Nobody's signing up to do that every day,
Right.
Yeah. And just the fact that there is no physical dependence, like there's no come down, there's no hangover, it's like we have this fucking wonder drug that grows out of cow shit. Why do you think cows were so revered in India? Like there's got to be a reason behind that. Have you ever heard of Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory?
Oh, of course.
I'm sure you have, especially being in your field. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean,
we can't obviously say one way or the other whether that's factual or not, but I think he was definitely on to something.
He's on to something. I mean, I think like whenever, all of society, like large quantities of society do anything, it's going to like result in like lots of fundamental changes to our brains. I mean, it's like you think about our society currently, like all of just like the bad habits and bad, eating tons of sugar and processed foods and drinking too much alcohol, too little sleep, too little exercise. It's like, I don't doubt that that's diminishing our, shrinking our brain to some degree on like a collective societal level.
Right.
Whereas
how could it not be?
Exactly. So it's like if the stoned ape hypothesis, from my understanding, it's like, all these people start doing mushrooms, and then it's like these different capacities of our brains sort of get unlocked or we grow more, and I think it's absolutely, it's like the brain is like, whatever you expose it to, whatever stimulus that be, the brain's going to respond. So if you're doing something that is going to create new neural connections and enough people in society are all doing that, then I don't doubt that's going to change our brains on a fundamental level. So I definitely think there's something to that theory.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the human brain basically doubled in size over the course of about 1 million years.
Mm-hmm.
That's ridiculous. Right. I mean, that's absolutely insane. I mean, 1 million years, when you say 1 million years, it's like, oh, that's a long time. But like in the grand scheme of Earth, as old as it is, like that is just a drop in the bucket, and for our brain size to increase to a double capacity from what it was over the course of that little fraction of time, there has to be some sort of external agent that would cause that. In my opinion, I mean, like, I'm not a scientist, obviously. I'm some dude who hosts a podcast from his kitchen, basically.
I think, you would certainly think though. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any other explanation for it, really. Like if somebody's got one, please send me an email and tell me what your theory is, but I don't think there is.
Yeah.
So you said you had a podcast, man?
Yeah. It's called the Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro Podcast. And it's talking to, everyone from, scientists, researchers, clinicians, to people more so focused on like, mindset, behavior, the psychology, kind of approaching the brain in all sorts of different ways. So
that's awesome.
I mean, I started it honestly, like just from a selfish desire to like be able to talk to people who I otherwise probably would have no business talking to,
Hey, me too.
I read a cool, like neuroscience paper, from a researcher at Stanford. It's like, I could try calling that guy up and saying, I want to learn more about this, but it's like, that's kind of just like asking for something and, for someone's time, which is such an important resource. Like,
right.
I figured with the podcast, it's like, all right, come on my podcast, you get something out of it. I get something out of it. And then as I generate a listener, a fan base, they get something out of it. So that's kind of how I started it. And I love like I've always just had a knack for like, curious, like asking good questions. It's like, I started like, when I first started the podcast, I'm like, writing down these different questions and like thinking, and I quickly like scrapped that. I was like, you know what, I'm going to just do my background research on these people, watch their videos, read their books if they've written books, whatever it is, but then come into it just, really mindfully and just paying attention to the conversation. It's like what people say is always going to, I feel like, give you the next question or, be able to guide where the interaction is going to go from there. So
yeah, absolutely. I try to make it less like an interview and more just like a conversation, like
I think the best podcasts are, that free flowing. I think Joe Rogan, honestly, like,
he's nailed it.
Whether
Let's be realistic, he's nailed it. He's got the format down to a science. That's why he's got one of the most popular podcasts in the world.
And it's just like, it looks just as like two dudes sitting down to lunch, right? Like, it's
and I think it looks like that because that's basically what it is.
It's what it is. It's just he's not addressing the camera.
Two people just sitting down, having a conversation. Yeah. There's no fourth wall break. There's none of that. It's just two people just sitting down and hashing out whatever subject it is. And like, I really admired that. Like, I've been listening to his podcast since like 2010 or 11, like a long time, like since almost like right after he started it. I was like, oh, Joe Rogan podcast. It's interesting. And then that kind of got me into listening to some other people like Duncan Trussell. I don't know if you've ever listened to the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Super funny, super good podcast. Really interesting guy. And a handful of others. And I've got a bunch of friends that run podcasts, and now I've just made another one. So, and hopefully we can all get to the point where we can just sit and have interesting conversations with people we want to talk to and hopefully, make a little money from doing it. Maybe eventually. I'm just trying to get to the point where it pays for itself. If I could do that, I'd be happy,
Yeah.
Because this is really just my hobby. You know what I mean? Like, I just love it. Like you said, there are people that I want to talk to, and this gives me a platform to do it that I may not have been able to do otherwise,
Yeah.
I think just some random asshole calling you on the phone going, hey, I'd really like to talk to you about this subject. Like, I'm kind of busy right now, but if it's a podcast, they're like, yeah, sure. I'd love to do that.
Yeah. That's like, I think also just like, the amount of news, and journalism that's just gotten so watered down to like these clickbait headlines and so much propaganda and all. Like people have realized the bullshit, I think that comes from that. And it's like, I think that's why part of why, podcasts like Joe Rogan's, like exploded, because it's like, you get this guy who's not a journalist, who's not, asking these formal interview questions, who doesn't have a specific political agenda, right? And it is just like, he's just asking these incredible people, like just, anything that he thinks of with no filter. I think that just the reality appeals to people, because
I think we could boil it down to one word, and that's just authenticity.
Authenticity. Yeah.
I think as long as you're being authentic and not trying to wear a mask and pretend that you're something that you're not, and you're just operating from your authentic self and asking authentic questions, and like basically just doing what we're doing, talking about whatever pops up. Like, well, here's like just exactly like you said, letting the mindfulness of the conversation drive the conversation, like actually actively listening and not having a set of questions. Because I did the same thing when I first started doing it. Like, I had I'd write down questions and I steered away from that real quick. I was like, this isn't going to work like this. This is just, I'd rather just talk to people. I think you get more out of that. I think it ultimately is just a better product in the end,
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So where can people find your podcast at?
Yeah. So Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, all the major audio platforms. We also have a YouTube channel people can check out, Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro. I gotta ask before. Yeah. Where'd the name come from? Yeah. So you'll like this. Yeah. So it's basically a reference to, are you familiar with the musical artist Childish Gambino?
I am.
Okay. So he had an album, Because the Internet, released, I believe, in like 2013. And there was a screenplay that he wrote kind of along with the album. And in the screenplay, the main character basically comes across the words Roscoe's Wetsuit in random places. It's like graffitied under the bridge or just like on, just random places. And so he's like throughout, like, what is Roscoe's Wetsuit? It's like, he's like just wondering like, what the hell is this? Near the end of the screenplay, he comes across a kid who's like scribbling it on a napkin in a cafe. So he's so excited. He's like, I'm finally going to realize what this means. He confronts the kid and he's like, what's Roscoe's Wetsuit? And the kid's reply is, I don't know. I just saw it online. So it's sort of like, to me, it's like sort of making fun of just the sheep kind of herd mentality of like people just following trends or whatever's cool online. And so like, in a way, it's sort of an ironic title where it's like, what I hope to do with the podcast and with my business is like help people, like cause people to like think for themselves and think creatively and do the opposite of that. I mean, I think
good luck.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's not the easiest task, but especially lately, especially with the whole COVID vaccine, you got one
one side of the field waging war against the other side of the field. And then there's the people in the middle. They're just like, I don't even know what's going on right now, but y'all are acting like assholes. That's kind of where I'm at. It's like, I'm not on one side or the other. I'm just in the middle watching it all play out. Like, this is,
I feel like most of us
divisive.
I feel like most of us are, though, to some degree, right? Where it's like, you know, there are these, like, I feel like, I don't know, like just society more and more has gotten like so divisive, like on whatever issue it is, you know, like the vaccine obviously is a great example where it's just like, there's like these hardcore, you know, you have to get the vaccine, hardcore, you know, the vaccine's terrible. But it's like, I feel like most people in general are not like these extremists, like, but that's what the media gives attention to.
They feed you what they want you to
polarities.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, it generates the most buzz and excitement and fear. I mean, I think a lot of it's fear mongering, honestly. So it's like, I don't know. I think like the media causes us to think that everyone's so divided and is so like hardened in their position. Whereas I feel like in reality, I feel like most of us are in the middle to some degree. Like maybe we lean a certain way or whatever, but it's like, there's very few like just like hardcore extremist, you know, like radicals.
I would love to believe that most of us are in the middle, but like then I get on Facebook and it's like I see even just the people like friends of mine that are like hardcore one way or the other, like super hardcore, and I'm like, yeah, maybe this is deeper than I thought it was. You know, like I would love to believe that the most of us are just in the middle, and that may be the case. I know I certainly am, and I know most of the people that I hang out with, you know, on a regular basis are. But then, you know, like I said, I get online and just some of the posts I see are just like, it's like, wow, this is really getting out of hand.
Yeah. It's like you think about like those, like, I feel like the people in the middle might not have as strong of an incentive to be writing these posts or whatever. And it's like, also these, like, if someone has a really radical perspective, it's going to generate a lot of like interaction, because it's going to like, there's going to be people who are like totally in support of what they're saying, and there's going to be people who are like adamantly against that. And then you're going to have all this conflict in the comments section and people calling each other names. It's, you know, going to escalate, but it's like that just division. I feel like it just riles people up, and it gets people to like pay attention. Like think about like the news. We don't, you know, we hear everything on the news is negative. It's, you know, explosions, shootings. You never hear about the like 200,000 planes that landed safely today. Just the one that crashed. Right. Or the Good Samaritan who did a kind deed. You know, no, we hear about the school shooter. Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know, but it's like that's what's going to generate the most buzz, I feel like, is negativity and radical ideas that I think it's going to generate a response.
I think it's all connected. I think, you know, they want to keep people in that state of fear, because when you're operating off of fear, then you're operating off of the amygdala response, that fight or flight thing. And then that's when people start, you know, like we were talking about earlier, like start self-medicating. And then they become even more like deeply, like just jaded and entrenched in the whatever ideology that they're entrenched in. And it's just like a weird cycle, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. See, I used to work in journalism. I went to school for journalism. I didn't actually get a degree in it, but I used to write for a few magazines and the newspaper and stuff like that, like 12 years ago or so. And just going from when, you know, print was still a thing, basically, you know, because print's it's on its way out. Let's be realistic. Everything's going to a digital format now. And that's why I don't write for the newspaper anymore, is because they went to leaning to a more digital format. And so they laid off Gannett was who I was working for, one of the subsidiaries of Gannett. And they laid off like just a shitload of people. And I was one of them. But like journalism's just fucking dead, man. Like, I mean, there's still a handful of good journalists out there that are actually like giving unbiased journalism. Like, but I think for the most part, I think journalism is the dying art, like truthful reporting. And what is truthful reporting anyway? Because I think it's impossible to be completely objective. You know, I think it's impossible for somebody to write something meaningful, especially about something serious, and not have an opinion on it. You're always going to inject your opinions into whatever you're writing. And very, very rarely are you going to be right in the middle, you know?
Yep. Yeah, no, it brings to mind, there was like in one of my high school, I think this like global studies or some class that I took, there was like one of the assignments we were shown like, two news articles that were like being reported like this on the same event, but it was just from two different newspapers. And it was like examining, and these aren't opinion columns. These are like,
Right.
news supposedly
news,
objectively reporting what happened. But then it's like, we broke down like the different, words that like are basically, maybe more negative leaning or more positive leaning, where it's like, you see how the writer's biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious, how it's playing into the story, and then how that's influencing our perception of what happened, where it's like, the half the class that read, the article from one newspaper first compared to the other half the class that read the other article first. It's like, and then you start talking about the issue. It's like, we have strongly different opinions based on that article, but it's like, it's not because of what actually happened. It's simply based on what
the verbiage.
The way. Yeah. Exactly. So that assignment I've always remembered that, like, wow, like that was really eye-opening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy to me. Yeah. Like, it goes exactly back to what we were talking about before. It's like, whatever you surround the mind with is what the mind inclines itself towards, so if you have this negative viewpoint and that's what you're receiving, that's what your mind is going to dwell on. If you have a positive viewpoint and that's what you're receiving, then that's what the mind is going to dwell on. It's just neurology is just fascinating to me in general. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I went in, that's why I started going to school for psychology. I've always been really interested in just the way that the mind works, and it just blows my mind. I love it. I absolutely love going to school. It's funny. I didn't know if I was going to enjoy going back, especially at, 40 years old, like, oh, I'm going back to school and I'm a fucking undergrad. So great. But I'm having a great time with it, man. It's like one of the only things that I'm really excited to do,
Yeah. I remember that feeling with like, I started my undergrad, like taking business classes, like and I was like just bored with those hour and 50-minute lectures. Like I was trying to get myself interested in it. I wish I could be interested in that, but I was just like, I started playing around doing some different classes, and I started like taking these psychology classes that I remember was just like, and I'm not a morning person whatsoever, but I'd have like these, a 10 a.m. biopsychology class or a neurobiology class that I'd actually be like looking forward to, like waking up relatively early for, in order to go to. And it was like, I feel like that right there is just like a sign that you're doing what you should be doing, when you're
for sure
excited about what you're studying. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got like an 8 a.m. philosophy class right now. And I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning anyway, just as a matter of habit. Like, I think I think I heard, Jordan Peterson recommended, he was like, pick a time to wake up and stick to it. Like, okay, well, I'll get up at 6 or 6:30, and I've stuck to that. But like, those 8 o'clock classes, those 8 a.m. classes are rough. Yeah. But, that's why I took a philosophy class. I was like, if I'm going to take an 8 a.m. class, I'm going to make it something that I'm going to enjoy. It's like, just because you have a schedule doesn't mean it has to be an unenjoyable schedule. It's your schedule. Make it whatever you want. People are like, oh, I don't want to have a schedule. Like, why not? Just fill your schedule with things you want to do. Like, exactly. It's possible to lead an enjoyable life and still have a schedule. In fact, you could have a more enjoyable life if you would just schedule things out and not fly by the seat of your pants so much, which there's a time and a place for that too. But, if you're trying to accomplish something, you should probably be a little more regimented. Yeah. At least for me. I know that if I just was left to my own devices, my life would be fucking chaos.
I'm with you there. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So Roscoe's wetsuit, we know where that came from. Thank you, Donald Glover. Appreciate that. Okay. So
which, by the way, he's the dream guest. Once I get Donald Glover on my podcast, like, I can die happy.
Hey man, just ask.
Oh yeah. No, I'm going to get him on. Yeah.
Just ask. That's what I've come to, because for a long time I was like booking some people that I didn't necessarily didn't even really have an interest in having on the show. And I kind of had just an epiphany recently, and I was like, you know what? Why am I doing that? Like, well, let's go after the people that I want to have on the show. And it's like,
right.
Then you get into the whole self-doubt thing. It was like, well, nobody knows who you are. Nobody's going to want to talk to you. It's like, yeah, well, you never know until you ask.
Yep.
Yeah. What's the worst that could happen? No response. Like, move on. Ask again.
Follow up.
Ask again in 2 months. Like, just keep on it. Just ask.
Yep.
People got time. People like promotion.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be a super cool guest, man. He would be awesome. Yeah. I'm going to start just like swinging, just swinging wide. Just Bill Murray. I think I'm shooting for Bill Murray.
You should. I'm totally. And it's like that. Those are the most rewarding interviews, I feel like, are the people who have been like following up with, their publicists for like the past year. And it's like, I finally got an interview scheduled. It's like, it's that much better, because it's like something I like.
You've actually worked towards it. Yeah. It didn't just fall in your lap. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And there's something to be said for that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for like that feeling of accomplishment. Like, man, I've been working towards this, and I fucking got it. Yes. There's nothing else that feels like that feeling of accomplishment. At least for me, like all the good things could happen to me, but like if you don't work for them, like how good is it really going to feel? I think that like really like working hard and putting a considerable amount of effort into achieving your goals and then actually achieving those goals is just without paramount,
Yeah.
Cool. So Roscoe's Wetsuit, I'm going to check it out. I haven't listened to it yet, but now I am super excited to check it out. I'm going to definitely subscribe.
Sweet.
And I will be an active listener. So you at least got, if nothing else, you got some promotion and a new listener and probably a few more, honestly.
There you go. Yeah. And if people want to find out more just like about the, the different neurotechnologies, like the base, and also you can access the podcast from like just the main website, which is roscoeswetsuitneuro.com. So awesome. There's also, it's a good resource if people want to just learn about the brain and the different neurotechnologies that impact the brain. So there's some good stuff on that.
Hopefully they will, because like I said, those are the topics that fascinate me. And that's, the stuff I like to listen to and like to read, because, and it could be just, I don't know. I seem to attract a lot of people, and I'm sure you do too, that have a similar interest. I think that's how we ended up having this conversation here. I'm pretty sure I made a Facebook post and you were like, oh, it sounds interesting. And then we kind of got in touch that way. And definitely everyone check out Roscoe's Wetsuit, because that sounds fucking awesome. Well, hey man, it's been super fun talking to you, Toby. I've had a really good time, and we'll definitely have to do this again sometime, man. I've had a really good time.
Yeah. And Justin, I don't know if you're ever going to be passing through like the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, but
I'm down there pretty frequently, like at least once or twice a year.
Dude, hit me up. I will gladly show you the whole neuro lab that I'm going to have set up, and we can play around with these different technologies. And
man, I am into it. We'll definitely do that for sure. I certainly will, man, for sure. Awesome. Man. Well, have a great rest of your day, bud.
Likewise.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
Thanks again to Toby for being on the show. What a cool guy he is, right? I had like a really good time talking to him. It was a super fun conversation. And if you wanted to get in touch with him and actually receive some of his neuro services, he can be found at roscoeswetsuitneuro.com. You can also listen to his podcast of the same name, Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro Podcast. Look that up on Apple and basically wherever you find podcasts at. He's also on YouTube, so check out his videos on there. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show if you enjoyed it. I'm working on a lot of really cool guests for the future, so be on the lookout for some pretty off-the-wall guests. Hopefully, I get some yeses. I've put extended my reach out a little farther than it may go. I don't know. We're gonna find out. You don't get 100% of the podcast that you don't try to get. So we're gonna try it out and see how it works. But this has been Dharma Junkie. I'm Justin. Namaste.
chaos is beautiful.